Elaine Grace Espelones. This afternoon, I am going to discuss about perfect negative correlation. But before that, let us define first correlation. Correlation is a statistical term that describes the relationship between two variables or data tests. The type of correlation two variables have is entirely dependent upon the variables themselves. Understanding the relationship is useful because we can use the value of one variable to predict the value of the other variable. Correlation is very important in the field of education as a measure of relationship between test scores and other measure of performance. With the help of correlation, it is possible to have a correct idea of the working capacity of a person. To better understand correlation, it is important to know the various types whether the relationships are positive, zero, or negative. But in this video, I will only focus on the perfect negative correlation since Ms. Pangilan was assigned to discuss the perfect positive correlation. By the way, for you to follow my report, kindly open your book on page 195 to 196. So, what is a perfect negative correlation? Negative correlation is a relationship between two variables in which one variable increases as the other decreases and vice versa. In statistics, a perfect negative correlation is represented by the value -1. The case of a perfect negative correlation having a value of -1 also rarely happens. In other words, perfect negative correlation means the relationship that exists between two variables is exactly opposite all the time. While variable x gains value, variable y decreases in value. An example of negative correlation would be height above sea level and temperature. As you climb the mountain, height is increasing. It gets colder because it decreases in temperature. In this example, two variables are considered. First, the height above sea level, and the other one is the temperature. As you notice, they are exactly opposite with each other. To understand more about perfect negative correlation, take a look on this example. The table shows the perfect negative correlation in purposive communication, which is the test X, and art appreciation, which is the test Y, taken by 12 AB English students. For test X, student 1 got the score of 64. And for test Y, student 1 got the score of 86. Student 2 got the score of 66 in test X and 84 in test Y. Student 3 got the score of 68 in test X and 82 in test Y. Student 4 got the score of 70 in test X and 80 in test Y. Student 5 got the score of 72 in test X and 78 in test Y. Student 6 got the score of 74 in test X and 76 in test Y. Student 7 got the score of 76 in test X and 74 in test Y. Student 8 got the score of 78 in test X and 72 in test Y. Student 9 got the score of 80 in test X and 70 in test Y. Student 10 got the score of 82 in test X and 68 in test Y. Student 11 got the score of 84 in test X and 66 in test Y. Student 12 got the score of 86 in test X and 64 in test Y. As you can see, the score of each student in test X is an exact opposite in test Y. X increases as Y decreases. A student who gets high score in test X is low in test y, and one who gets highest in test x got lowest in test y. Now, I will show you how to get the perfect negative correlation with the use of computer, specifically with the use of Microsoft Excel. Microsoft Excel is one of the easiest ways to quickly calculate the correlation between two variables for a large data set.
So the first thing you need to do is you have to identify your variables. We have here the variables from the result of the test in purposive communication and art appreciation taken by 12 AB English students. So we have here two variables, the variable x, which represents the purposive communication, and variable y, which represents the art appreciation. Second, input the data. When inputting your correlations, you'll need to designate one variable as the x variable and one as the y variable. You'll also need to have a concrete numbers to input. For cell A, we will encode here the variable x. And for cell B, we will have here the variable y. Third, we will find the analysis tool and click correlation. For array 1, highlight this data in cell A. And for array 2, highlight this data from cell B. Then click OK. Lastly, determine the correlation. Since the value obtained is -1, this denotes a perfect negative correlation, which also seldom happens. So that's how you can get or you can calculate the perfect negative correlation with the use of the computer.
Now, I will show you how to make a simple correlation line graph of a perfect negative line graph of test X and test Y by the 12 AB English students. So, we are going to use this data, the test scores in purposive communication, which is the variable X, and art appreciation, which is the variable Y, taken by the 12 AB English students. The primary use of this line graph is to demonstrate or evaluate the correlation between the two variables. Its primary function is to visualize the strength of correlation between two plotted variables. So we have two variables, the variable x and the variable y. In y-axis, we will put here the test y. the variable y or the test y. Then in x-axis, we will put here the test x or the variable x. And now, we will going to plot the two variables. So let's start with student 1 who got 64 in test x and 86 in test y. So for student 1, 64 in test x and 86 in test y. So for student 2, got 66 in test x and 84 in test y. Student 3 got the score of 68 in test x and 82 in test y. Student 4 got the score of 70 in test x and 80 in test y. Student 5 got the score of 72 in test x and 78 in test y. Student 6 got the score of 74 in test x and 76 in test y. Student 7 got the score of 76 in test x and 74 in test y. Student 8 got the score of 78 in test x and 72 in test y. Student 9 got the score of 80 in test x and 70 in test y. Student 10 got the score of 82 in test x and 68 in test y. Student 11 got the score of 84 in test x and 66 in test y. And lastly, student 12 got the score of 86 in test x and 64 in test y. The plot represents the relationship between the test x and the test y. Now, I will make a line out of this plot. As you can see, the straight line falls from left to right, and this is a linear negative correlation. This pattern means that when the score of one observation is high, we expect that the score of the other observation to be low, and vice versa. A negative correlation appears as a recognizable line with a negative slope. As the x variable increases, the y variable decreases. That is why the line falls as you move to the right. And that's how you make a simple correlation line graph of a perfect negative correlation. To sum up my report, a perfect negative correlation means the relationship that exists between two variables is opposite all the time. Like in my example, the student who got the highest score in purposive communication, which is the test X, got the lowest score in art appreciation or the test Y. And take note, situation like this rarely happens. Lastly, keep in mind that a perfect negative correlation is represented by the value -1. And that's all my report about the perfect negative correlation. I hope you have learned something. Once again, I am Elaine Grace Espelones. Thank you for watching. Keep safe and God bless.